topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program, which has been brought to you with passion and pride since February 2015. Thanks for tuning in this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. If we've not met before and you don't know me, I'm a workforce advisor, organizational psychologist, management consultant, logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Gusto Now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by building a dynamic, high-performance culture, inspirational leadership, and nurturing managers activated by meaning and purpose. Many organizations are not aware of how critical it is to invest in developing their leaders and managers, not just for their own effectiveness, but also to avoid burnout and keep them fulfilled so that they can also measure and monitor the experience of purpose in the organization to keep it working as an operational imperative. So much opportunity there. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com or my personal site, elisecortez.com. Getting into today's program, we have with us today the authors of The New Science of Momentum, How the Best Coaches and Leaders Build a Fire from a Single Spark, which is the focus of our conversation. We have Don Yaeger. He's a 12-time New York Times bestselling author, longtime associate editor for Sports Illustrated, and one of the most in-demand public speakers on the corporate circuit. He is the host of the highly rated Corporate Competitor podcast. Also with us today is retired General Bernard Banks, who now serves as the director of Rice University's Doerr Institute for New Leaders and is a professor in the practice of leadership within the university's Jesse A. Jones Graduate School of Business. Bernie retired from the United States Army in 2016 as a brigadier general after having successfully led West Point's Department of Behavioral Sciences and Leadership in his final assignment. He has led military units ranging in size from 10 to 3,000 plus people. Additionally, he has engaged with organizations around the globe regarding their leadership development efforts. In other words, we have two amazing powerhouses with us today. Don joins us today from Tallahassee, Florida, and General Banks from Houston, Texas. Gentlemen, a hearty welcome to Working on Purpose.
Thank you so much, Elise.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Isn't it great to be on the other side of the mic, Don? You know, it's just fun, right?
So great.
Right. Well, let's kick this thing off by celebrating this beautiful book you put into the world. I absolutely loved it, as I told you before we got on air. Huge fan. I want to dive into it. I was really intrigued by how you talk about in the book, even just the spark for the book, how it came to be. I think that's a really fun thing to kick off with. So one of you tell us about how this book came into to be present for us.
I'll jump in. Many of your listeners might remember that there was a Super Bowl played a few years ago, in which the favored New England Patriots had fallen behind the Atlanta Falcons 28-3. In fact, midway through the third quarter, the odds makers gave New England a 0.6% chance of winning the game at that stage. Atlanta was a 99.4%. The odds of winning. And then suddenly little things started to happen, things that hadn't happened previous in the game. Tom Brady, the least mobile quarterback in the NFL, suddenly ran for a first down. And little things started to pile up. And what happened was that the Patriots began to change the momentum of the game. And before it was over, someone will remember the greatest comeback in the history of the Super Bowl. No team had ever come back from more than 14 points down, and the Patriots came back to win in overtime. And the very next day, I came in to my office, opened up the whiteboard where all the creative team were gathered in the conference room and just wrote the words, "How does a moment turn into momentum?" How does that happen? How can we explain what happened last night if people are trying to understand, could that happen to us in our organization? Could we be the Atlanta Falcons and maybe give up a great lead? And over the course of the next 8 years, I partnered with General Banks, one of my great friends for many years, and we began interviewing the most amazing leaders on the planet. We began going into the field and polling Americans, adults, on what they believe about momentum, because we wanted to explain what we could about the dynamic that allows that to happen in organizations. And what we found was some really incredible detail, and I know we'll get into that with you, Elise. But it was an amazing journey. I think both Bernie and I were sad we had to cut it short. We would have gone 5 more years interviewing people because we were so into it. But you have to stop at some stage and write, and I'm grateful that you enjoyed it.
I do understand that, and I absolutely loved it. I wish I would have been there in your back pockets for the whole trip. I would have been cheering you on and ask this too. Okay, so one of the things that I think I really gravitated to, that I think is pretty core to what you write about for momentum, which we'll get into next, but I think I want to situate first the role of mirror neurons, and of course, the concept of flow. If you can situate and kind of explain how mirror neurons work, why they're important, and of course, why flow is related to momentum.
I'll let you take this one. Go ahead.
Yeah. You want me to take it?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'll tell you, one of the first things we started thinking about was, there was some pretty famous work done about 30 years ago by a researcher in Santa Clara, a doctor named Mihai, and his last name was so long I couldn't pronounce it.
I've always said it Chisholm-Mahali, but I'm sure that's not right. It's something
you
close to
probably
that.
as close to that. He told me to call him Dr. C.
Yeah,
Right?
I got that. Yeah,
it worked out great, which is what Mike Krzyzewski does too, Coach K. But but Mihai actually agreed in the early stages of our research to sit down with me, and it turned out to be one of the very last interviews he got a chance to do before he passed away a few years back. But in that dinner with he and his wife, I proposed to him that flow, as he defined it, which is the ability to believe I'm in flow, right? We've heard that phrase used before, where suddenly you look up and you don't realize that it's quitting time because you've been so engaged in your work. You love what you're doing so much that you don't see the clock. You're writing and suddenly it's 2 a.m. and you have no idea. That's flow. But what we wanted to propose was that when a group of people get in flow, that's when you create momentum, right? It's group flow, which is different than what he studied. And by the time dinner was over, he was fully engaged. He was excited. He was cheering us on, encouraging that this was exactly the extension of his work from 30 years earlier, and couldn't have been happier to offer us advice and counsel. So flow is that ability for an individual to be moving towards something special. Momentum is when a group of people are doing exactly that. When a team, an organization, a company are moving together in lockstep. And so with that, the next thing that really kind of came up was this idea about mirror neurons. One of the ways Dr. C encouraged me to look at this concept was that there's a fair amount of research done right now on mirror neurons, which is the ability for 2 people to feel something similar, even though only one of them actually experienced it, right? I'll just put it really simply. It's like if you and I work at the same place, Elise, and you complete a masterful sale, something really big, instead of being jealous that you were the one to complete it, I'm as happy for you as if I'd have completed it myself. And that is when mirror neurons are flowing in very simple ways. Some people talk about it like when you go into a room and somebody yawns and suddenly other people start yawning. That's the action of mirror neurons actually taking and physiologically playing itself out, even though neurologically it was me who yawned, and then suddenly you feel the need to. And so mirror neurons are when that group of people moving in flow together are actually capable of celebrating each other, as opposed to finding jealousy amongst one or the other, because you are going to get credit for this moment, as opposed to me. And so those two elements of the project were ultimately very important in our understanding and our description for others of how momentum can become a collective effort.
Beautifully explained.
Really long answer.
Yeah, that's okay. It's a really important concept, I think, for listeners and viewers to get as we go along here. It's very, very powerful. And by the way, I'm proud to tell you that in the 10.5 years that I've hosted the show, not once has my guest yawned on the show. So therefore, I didn't yawn either. Don't even start, Don. You're not going to be the first one. Okay, so now that we've done all that, let's talk about what is momentum. Why should we care about this?
Yeah, I think to build off of what Don just shared, I like to think of it as a belief with respect to, do we think things are working for us or against us? Mm-hmm. Quite simply. Going back to this notion of flow. Is the flow headed in the right direction, or is the flow heading the wrong direction? Do we feel like we're swimming with the current or against the tide? And so it is a belief. It's a mindset. It's a mindset. And that mindset, it's important for leaders to be intentional about how they shape the mindset and beliefs of their other team members. And so in the research that we conducted and the interviews that we were privileged to take part in, we examined how leaders across 4 different verticals, business, sports, politics, and the military, went about creating momentum throughout their careers. And the stories they shared were fascinating.
I love just some of the descriptors you have in your book. There's just so many great things. I ran out of ink when I was highlighting your book, but I like how that momentum's been described as a competitive energy tsunami. That sounds good to me. A great exaggerator, which is what John Maxwell said, and a force multiplier. I mean, doesn't that sound pretty good if you're trying to get a team to a win, and you're trying to do something and turn a company around, or you're performing a military operation? That all sounds pretty good to me.
We should all want that, wouldn't we? I mean, wouldn't the opportunities for us to be successful be greater if any one of those things were true within our team?
Yeah, and I like what you also said when we talk about momentum. You say in your book, and I quote, you say, "We start with the premise that momentum exists and can be manipulated by intentional types of preparation and organizational structure." And we give the following definition: momentum is a synergistic force that influences the progress, resilience, and focus of a team. And its impact on the mindset of a team, positively or negatively, can be manipulated or extended. Now, that ought to be, ladies and gentlemen, both exciting and terrifying you if you're a leader. I hope.
It should be exciting. When we were thinking about this book, I was having a conversation with one of my friends who runs the private equity practice for a very large financial services concern. And these folks invest billions of dollars in organizations in the hopes that they can unlock dormant potential, create value. And when I was talking to him about this concept, he said, "Creating momentum is my job." Plain and simple. My job's not to make money. My job is to find opportunities where, through our company's intervention, we can create positive momentum, unlock an investment thesis, and ultimately return money to those who had the courage to invest in us because they thought that our acumen with respect to generating momentum was worth taking a risk on.
That is terribly exciting, Bernie. Oh my goodness, very exciting.
But Elise, I want to be the negative. I'm going to be the negative Nelly here. I'm not going to yawn, but I'm going to be negative Nelly. I love Bernie's answer there. But one other thing that stood out to us was in the early stages of the work on this, we went into the field with a nationally recognized polling firm and reach out to 4,000 Americans, adults, right, and ask them a series of questions about momentum. Number one, the first thing that stood out was that 90+% of them believed in momentum. That number rose to 100% if you only included in the answers those who had played sports, had either led an organization or served in the military. You do one of those three things and you're 100% convinced momentum exists. But while most of them do believe it can be manipulated, only 25% of them had ever worked in an organization where the construct, the idea of manipulating momentum had actually ever been raised. Where, what can we do? How can we create something? How can we take advantage of this moment? Only 25%. But the last number, which really stood out, was that 72% of them said if they were working someplace where they perceived momentum had shifted to a competitor, where they were on the losing end of they were coming up from behind in this idea, they would consider looking for other work. Now, so while it's in Bernie's example, it's that guy's job, right, to create momentum. For all the rest of us, it's our job too. Yeah. Because if we're not, number one, not only do we risk giving ground to our competitors, we also risk losing our very best employees, who they may not say it, but they know it, right? They know when, as it's a mindset, right? It's a belief system. And they know when they believe that they're behind and losing ground, and nobody wants to ride out on a sinking ship.
And this is why, of course, right? All three of us know how important leadership and culture is why we're going to talk about that next after we take our first break. So let's do that. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with retired General Bernie Banks, who now serves as the director of Rice University's Dorr University for New Leaders and is a professor in the practice of leadership within the university's Jesse A. Jones Graduate School of Business. We also have Don Yaeger, a best-selling author, associate editor for Sports Illustrated, and host of the highly rated Corporate Competitor podcast. We've been talking about where their book Momentum came from, what is momentum, why it's important. After the break, we are going to talk a little bit about their model, but then we're also going to talk about how momentum can be stewarded by leaders and within culture. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, as I'm dedicated to helping create a world where organizations thrive because their people thrive and they're led by inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness. And we do business that betters the world. I keep researching and writing my own books. So one of my latest came out. It's called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And I wrote it to help leaders understand today's diverse and discerning workforce. What do they want and need from you, from their work experience? And then I offer 22 best practices that that can equip you for you to be able to put that into your culture and provide that for them. You can find my books on Amazon or my personal site, elisecortez.com. If you are just now joining us, my guests are Don Yaeger and Bernie Banks. They're the authors of The New Science of Momentum, How the Best Coaches and Leaders Build a Fire from a Single Spark, which of course I loved. Okay, so before we get into talking about leadership and culture and how we can really presence and nurture the idea of momentum, let's talk about your model. It's pretty hefty. It's pretty strong. and robust. So can one of you take us through your momentum model?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So when thinking about how we would distill the insights gleaned from talking to leaders across the 4 sectors, 9 things came to the fore. 1, it all starts with leadership. Leadership is the X factor. It's what makes organizations and momentum go. And so the model starts with leadership. How do you foster effective leadership? Create clear alignment around what direction are we headed? How do we galvanize people's willingness to work in a coordinated manner and then sustain the effort required to achieve our desired aims? From there, it's a leader's responsibility to foster the right culture. So what are those norms, values, beliefs that you're going to put in place that are going to serve as the daily expectations of those you're in a relationship with? Then it's important to get the right people on your team. Recruitment matters. You don't get to recruit every single member of your team, but you have to recruit key players, what Coach K referred to as glue guys, the right A players. Get the right people in place in those critical roles. And from there, you start to think about, what are we going to have to do in order to prepare ourselves to put ourselves in a position where we can seize a moment or a set of activities? And so this preparation component, people highlighted how they had gone about that over time. Once those things transpire, when the moment happens, we call that the spark. And it doesn't have to be one thing. It can be a set of things that transpire within a certain time frame. But then it's important for leaders to be able to recognize the spark and then help others to recognize it as well. And so communications became important. Leader communications. How do you communicate effectively to help people put the spark into context and galvanize their willingness to continue the effort going forward? From there, you have to maintain a positive climate on your team. Climate is a short-term reaction to the environment. Culture is pervasive. So how do you have a team where, hey, guess what? Yes, we are continuing to foster this belief that, yes, we can do this. We were built for this, which leads into the importance of never taking mindset and belief for granted, fostering that, all which leads to outcomes, which then tie into feedback. And so it's an iterative process. But those 9 things stood out time and time again in our conversations with leaders across all those fields of endeavor.
Beautifully explained, Bernie. I think you might be a professor. And so listeners and viewers, that's the meat there, what Bernie just really explained of how that all ties together. And what they've done is they've got a chapter on each one of those pieces. It's so you can really dive deep into it. But that was beautifully explained. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to talk about how this shows up and some of the examples you have in your book in terms of leadership, in terms of culture, so our listeners and viewers can now connect the concept. I am not a sports fan or really big into sports. I'm lucky if I know what sport is being played in the season, so don't hold that against me, guys. But I am very, very fascinated with the Golden State Warriors. And so I want to talk about how this notion here of you've got a chapter on the culture and what Coach Kerr, if that's how I'm saying his name, Kerr is doing to shape their culture and then set them up for such strong performance and success. And even the purchase, could you just kind of situate, you talk about the purchase of the Warriors. Let's start with that. That's pretty fascinating.
Well, I'll jump in there. The Warriors were a pretty, were kind of trending upwards, as seemingly, but though they were trending, they seemed to be underperforming against the talent that the ownership that bought the team believed them to be capable of. And so they chose to make a leadership change. They brought in a new coach, and ironically, the coach they brought in had never been a head coach before in the NBA. So he's brand new to his role, but he'd been around and been a participant in many championship teams. So he understood what he believed was the most important thing was the reshaping of the culture. He didn't need to change players. He didn't need to change leaders. What he needed was to reshape the culture. And he made a point that there were several elements of the culture that really stood out to him. But the number one piece, he believed the culture was built on 4 core values: joy, competition, compassion, and mindfulness. I'm going to get to joy last, but But on the idea of competition, he believed that the players needed not to believe that anything was given to them, that they had to continuously be ready to be their very best in order to get playing time. So competition was extraordinarily important as a cultural value that he wanted players to understand. Don't expect anything. Come prepared to compete. Compassion was equally important because the one thing he said is, we're in a failure sport, right? Nobody wins every game. Nobody hits every shot. Even Michael Jordan's most famous quote is about the number of shots he missed. And so the idea of compassion was in his cultural ethos was that we had to be forgiving of each other because you're going to fail and I can't be mad at you for failing because tomorrow I might fail and I need you to be supportive of me. So show compassion to each other. Mindfulness was just simply the idea of constantly being connected. He was looking for connection, and that really led to his concept of joy, which he said is the most important in building any great team culture. And joy for him was looking at what makes it. We're going to be better at our work if we're happier at our work, right? And so how do I build joy? And one of the things he discovered was that the previous coach didn't agree that music should be played during practice. Very simple thing. But the players love music. The players want to dance as they're practicing. And so he very simply added music to the atmosphere, and it changed the way people felt about being in the workplace. He started looking at it and saying, the other thing we need is to know each other better. So he started inviting player families to travel with the team on charters as they were heading to away games. And he would invite those families to join the team for dinners because he wanted everybody to get to know each other better. He wanted a better sense of joy. And that didn't just manifest itself. It did so in explosive ways. Just 3 years after he became the head coach, Golden State, delivered the greatest season in NBA history. They won more games than any team ever had. Forget Michael Jordan's Bulls. They delivered more wins than anybody in history, based on, he would argue, this concept of joy.
I thought that was so compelling, that whole bit that you wrote about that. And I think the idea of situating and making joy a central part of your culture, and then talk about those mirror neurons, of course, being able to see how people respond to that music and increase their energy and their happiness. And then I did really appreciate the idea that in terms of encouraging the compassion, so that when the other players knew what was happening in their personal lives, what were they dealing with, what was important to them, who is their family. I just think that is really, really something special to celebrate, and I really wanted to make sure that we showcase that. So gorgeous share. Thank you, Don. I also think it's important.
Bernie, she said gorgeous share to me, not. Yeah. Yours is going to be more intellectual. You're going to have.
If I can find it, Bernie, I'll say the same thing for you, but only if you earn it.
You're going to have bigger words.
This is mirror neurons. I'm happy for Don to have gotten a gorgeous share. So his gorgeous share is my gorgeous share. We're winning.
You see, it's so easy to, make someone's day, right? We should just do more of it.
Right. But don't yawn, Bernie. Don't yawn.
But, here's where it gets really fun for me as somebody who's been trafficking in meaning and purpose and all these kinds of things for some time. Now we can talk about the numbers of how this stuff, translates. If you talked about in the book how the Golden State Warriors topped the Forbes annual valuation list for NBA teams for the first time in their history in 2022, and then topped the list again in 2023 with a value of $7.7 billion. I mean, right. There's so many things we could say about that, but I think it's important that listeners and viewers can connect this to the bottom line as well. It's not just feely good stuff. These are real results.
Yeah, and I think that's an important piece of this entire discussion, right? Nothing about this journey for Bernie or myself has been about looking for some really fun thing to do. No, we want people to be more successful, right? And momentum allows you to become more successful.
Just fun all the way around. And you guys are both fun. What a delight. I didn't know what I was going to expect. And look at you. I might not want to give you back. So we'll see. Okay, well, let's talk about the spark. You have a whole chapter on the spark. And this is kind of where things where you say where the spark is the place where belief systems begin to shift. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. So when thinking about how do you recognize momentum, this was something that immediately came to mind for me because of the time I spent in the military. In the military, we spend countless hours preparing to develop capabilities that should something transpire in the world that requires our services, we're able to recognize those moments, tailor our activities to create positive momentum so that we can prevail and secure our nation and do the things we do in the military. And so in the military, we call that seizing the initiative. And so how do you recognize when the moments occur that now present an opportunity for you to seize the initiative, to go on the offense? In the military, when you're on defense, you're doing defense the entire time with the intent of getting back on the offense. It's always about having offensive efforts that you are orchestrating. And so teaching young leaders throughout the military how to recognize when critical things transpire and then to build upon those in a very thoughtful way was something we actually taught people how to do well. And so I was very curious, how are others doing this? And one of the conversations we had was with a very successful basketball coach, Buzz Williams, who at the time was the Texas A&M basketball coach. And he was talking to us about how he'd prepare his players to recognize the importance of certain critical moments within a game. And he was just so creative the way he went about it. Conversely, when we talked to one of the co-founders of NVIDIA about how are you going to recognize a spark, he went back to, hey, we didn't stumble upon the importance of GPUs. We knew that one day there would become a need to have computational power that could do several things at once, foster parallel processing, conduct matrix operations, and nobody was there yet. And nobody could really anticipate how fast do we have to get there. But they knew at some point in the future, that's going to become important. And then boom, some things transpired and they had the best capability and suddenly they just skyrocketed. But it wasn't the first time they had done that. They had also done it for gaming. They had also done, so they're in the business of constant reinvention in order to create positive momentum for their organization and to change the game inside the technology space. And so you saw it in the military, you saw it in industry, you saw it in sports, we saw it in politics. In our conversation with James Carville and how he would prepare candidates, it was fascinating. He'd say, at some point in this campaign, something's going to transpire. And in that moment, we have to be prepared to seize it and to build upon it. And he ran us through some scenarios and then talked about how you would create dialogue around that in the moment. And he rattled off a fictional scenario where he gave an impassioned speech. And you were like, oh, you had to have that already. That's something you memorized. He's like, no.
Like, made it up in the moment.
Made it up in the moment. But it was unbelievable. But you saw this notion that they were all able to recognize when do a set of discrete activities gain outsized importance? How can you communicate that to others and then build upon it?
Yeah.
And NVIDIA, I mean, I think one of the things that stood out, one of the co-founders sat down with us and it was fantastic to learn. I mean, you know them to be currently the first $4 trillion company in history. But that company back in 2016 was kind of it was about $122 billion in value. So it was a decent sized company, but not anywhere near what it is today. But they began then investing in this computational power that others were not investing in, so that when the moment that ChatGPT is announced to the world, suddenly becomes a phenomenon, right? It becomes the spark. The very next day, NVIDIA was worth $32 billion more than they were the day before.
Wow.
Why? because they were ready for the spark.
Yeah. Yeah, this is so exciting, gentlemen. And it's just a shame that neither one of you are very passionate about this either, right? Just
we
terrible.
don't care about this at all.
I know. So we're going to take our next break here. But I love what I want to situate for our listeners and viewers is the idea, the opportunity that you can teach people in your organization to recognize the spark. So let's have them thinking about that when we go on to break. Because after the break, I want to situate a little bit about leader communication and the power and the role of storytelling in relation to that, as you kind of started to allude to, Bernie. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with retired Brigadier General Bernie Banks, who now serves as the director of Rice University's Dewar Institute for New Leaders, and is also a professor in the practice of leadership within the university's Jesse H. Jones Graduate School of Business. And we also have Don Yaeger. He's a best-selling author, associate editor for Sports Illustrated, and the host of the Corporate Competitor podcast. We've been talking about some of the aspects relative to their model of the momentum. After the break, we're going to talk about that, what I mentioned, the leader communication and how compelling you can situate yourself to really steward momentum in your organization. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. As you know by now, this program is dedicated to empowering and inspiring you along your journey to realize more of your potential. If you want to learn more about how we can work together and learn about the Gusto Now Academy for leaders and individuals on various journeys alike, make your way to gusto-now.com and then navigate to the training tab where you can find the Academy. Love to have you join us. If you are just coming on to the episode with us, my guests today are Don Yaeger and Bernie Banks. They're the authors of The New Science of Momentum, How the Best Coaches and Leaders Build a Fire from a Single Spark. So I have to celebrate this notion, of course. You have a chapter on leader communications. And of course, I am a champion for helping leaders to develop really being effective, strong storytellers. So let's situate how that plays into being able to nurture momentum.
We're both being gracious. Don's like,
I know.
Bernie,
you're so great.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that highly effective leaders do is that they use stories to establish context and to positively influence the things that are transpiring around them. And so learning how to tell an effective story was absolutely essential as we looked at this and we saw how people sought to put very complex things into terms that people could understand, right? And so learning how to communicate, learning how to tell stories, leveraging facts, not making things up, but highlighting things that were tangible and saying, okay, here's why this matters. Here's how it's going to positively influence this other thing. So earlier you were talking about facts and figures and you gave some of those stats from the Golden State Warriors. Well, we were talking to David Petraeus about his activities when he was leading U.S. forces in Iraq during what was later called the Surge. And it was a turnaround effort. Prior to his arrival, things weren't going really well. And so he came up with a 4-pronged strategy for how he was going to address stuff. But one of the elements of that really hinged on telling the story in a factual way and then putting those facts into context. Don't end up in the spin room, which is what a lot of people try to do. And so using facts and figures, telling compelling stories, making your communications easy to understand. plain language. Don't become too verbose. All of those things play a significant role in helping people to understand, here's the moment, here's why it matters, here's what we have to do going forward if we're to take advantage of it.
Well, and keep in mind, gentlemen, that I'm all about developing inspirational leaders, and so being able to share a critical message in a way that connects your team members to what it is that you're out to do and encourages them in the process, lifts them in the process, is just so compelling, and so much of what I teach as well. So that whole chapter just really excited me. And then under that I want to get to next is this idea of how you can champion belief and mindset. I think you said something earlier, Don, about this. And let's see, I already said that you gave a gorgeous response. Bernie, so did you, just to make sure we both get our kudos in here. But I do want to situate more of that, because I think there's so much that organizations are missing in terms of opportunity and in terms of how they really steward, nurture, and support belief and mindset, especially relative to momentum. If one of you can take that.
Well, I think one of the things that stands out, to the point Bernie was making about, how do leaders communicate, and one way to look at the way we built this model is, it's almost like if you're a camper, if you go out camping, and the very first thing you have to do if you're going to build a fire, right, is you have to assemble the fire together. You got to put the wood together in the right way so that there's air that can fuel it, and you want to make sure it's stacked right. There's kindling in there. And then at some stage, so that's all the pre-work. That's the recruiting. That's the culture. That's putting together the team that's ready for the moment. Then the spark occurs, right? And the fire starts to grow. But now comes our responsibility as leaders to fan the flames, to make that fire as dominant as possible, to let it take hold. And one of the things that really matters in that fanning the flames window is how we encourage, as you said, right? It's how we change, and we take the belief and mindset. They already believe we're going to be successful. Now the moment has occurred. Now it's our job to remind them all that work we did beforehand, all that preparation we did for this moment. It's ours. It's here. Let's go. Right. And if I can encourage you to bring the best possible mindset to the workplace, if I can get you to believe with me that unbelievable things are ahead, the fire is going to be magnificent. You're going to, if you trust me, if you believe me, and you are now witnessing this fire taking hold, you're going to jump on board. And the people who jump on board are going to help you through leader communications, continue to fuel the mindset of their fellow teammates, right? Again, mirror neurons. As belief systems grow, belief systems grow.
It's so powerful. And as a leader, your capacity, ladies and gentlemen, to steward that, to nurture that, to guide that is just so powerful. And think about the impact that you can have in your organization when you learn to do that well. So exciting. Okay, so we talked about those mirror neurons. And of course, I situate then how important it is to be able to steward that positive emotional contagion. I want to be able to share you have several practices in your book or approaches for leveraging emotional contagion to build momentum in teams. Let's talk about at least a few of those to be able to equip our listeners and viewers with some other material as they walk away from our podcast.
Yeah, so there are several things that we would recommend in that regard. One, this notion of setting positive expectations and establishing a positive vision. Effective leaders set high standards. They don't set the bar low. They set the bar high, and they say, guess what? Here's how we're going to go about clearing that height. So setting positive expectations, establishing a positive, and then turning that into clear goals, SMART goals, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time-bounded. And then tapping into people's why, the purpose piece. You've already highlighted the importance of that. Another thing is having a growth mindset based on the work of Carol Dweck. So how do you promote curiosity? How do you think about empathy? And how do you leverage the two so that you can learn along the way. It's been said that the most agile organizations are the ones that learn most effectively, and taking time to engage in introspection and exploration matters. A third is to think about, how do you foster a reflective mindset to really get people to be mindful, to engage in mediation, so to find that calm space that can unlock new insights. And there are a variety of others around understanding the neurofeedback you're receiving, right? So there are a number of ways in which you can go about applying these things in service of enhancing the likelihood that you achieve positive momentum.
It's so exciting, gentlemen. It's so exciting when you see this stuff in motion. You know, when I go into organizations, I can tell immediately. There's this idea called limbic resonance, right? It's probably related to what you're doing with the mirror neurons, but I can tell if an organization is gelled or not. I can feel that energy. I know if they feel demoralized, disconnected, or if they feel congealed and together and on fire. And I love how we're talking about equipping leaders and organizations to create more of that momentum. So this is so exciting for me. All right, we have time really to cover just a little bit about the idea of outcomes and feedback. That's really your last chapter. It's the finale. So let's just talk a little bit about that. We have maybe 2 minutes to discuss that.
I'll be quick, but I do know that one of the things when we looked at outcomes and feedback, one of the places we turned for great learning was the Blue Angels, right? The Navy's unbelievable team of pilots.
If someone in the Navy can be unbelievable, they're the ones.
This is what happens when you invite an Army guy.
Says an Army, yes, that says an Army guy, yeah.
Can you mute the Army guy? So that's my mirror neuron talking to you, Bernie. But yeah, the Navy, the Blue Angels are fantastic. But one of the things that stood out to us is, here's this organization that performs at the highest level, but because of turnover, right? They have turnover every year. They have forced turnover. They bring in new pilots every year. Their goal is to build momentum throughout the season so that their best show is their last show, right? They want to get better every show. And so one of the things that they do in the process of that is they do unbelievable feedback loops, in which when they walk into the room after a practice or a show, everyone takes from their arm their rank, right? It ranks come off, because this is no longer about you having a position as general and I'm just a journalist. This is the opportunity for us to speak truth to each other. Great feedback. We have this phrase in the book: feedback is the breakfast of champions. And those who can actually eat breakfast do well. So go to work, build feedback into your organization, which will allow you then to grow, prepare, start the loop again. That's the beauty of this model as we drafted it. It's actually a continuous loop. And while the momentum will slow at some stage, your goal is to restart the model, keep it moving, keep it growing, and make momentum yours.
Oh, so good, guys. So good. Okay, so I want to give you a chance each just to say a little something in closing, say maybe 15 or 20 seconds. The show is listened by people around the world. They care about elevating their own leadership, stewarding their organizations, or more meaningfully plugging into their own work. What would you each like to leave them with?
Don, you want to start?
Sure. I would tell you, I think the beauty of a project like this is that it starts with a crazy moment and an idea. And next thing you know, you get a chance to learn from the very best. I think that, we believe success leaves clues, and that's what we went out to do. We chased success, sought its clues, and put it here for others to hopefully grow from.
I would just like to build upon that and say, you need not have experienced something personally to make it an experience that you can leverage personally. Learn from the wisdom of others. It will accelerate your ability to be effective in your role. Mining these stories has been an honor for both of us. And we're just excited to share these stories with others in the hope that it can lead to people positively impacting other people's lives around the globe.
Bernie and Dawn, it is an absolute delight and pleasure to know you both, to have learned from you, be inspired by you. I'm so grateful that I found you, that you came on the show. Thank you for being on Working on Purpose.
Thank you.
Honored.
Listeners and viewers, you're going to want to learn more about these two amazing gentlemen and their book. There's a couple places you can go. You can go to the HarperCollinsFocus.com website to find their book, but I would also recommend that you go to LinkedIn and find each of them individually and connect with them that way. So that would be one of the best and easiest ways to do that. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on air with Isaac Prylotensky talking about his book, How People Matter, Why It Affects Health, Happiness, Love, Work, and Society. He's passionate about mattering, well-being, and fairness. And we talked about how when these are satisfied in people, families, communities, organizations, and even nations altogether thrive. Next week, we'll be on the air with Ken Banta talking about his new book, Seeing Around Corners, C-Suite Wisdom from America's Most Insightful Leaders. See you then. And together, let's lean in and learn together how to make workplaces that work for everyone and find ways to do business in a way that betters the world. Let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.